Is anyone in academia willing to rebuke an SJW mob? These people have tenure and institutional authority, but most of them seem scared speechless. Let's explore the reasons why on today's Fiamengo File. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. In last week's video, I outlined the history of Heidelberg University in the 1930s to showcase how remarkably easily seemingly intelligent people can accept barbarism and can even come to be its ardent supporters. We're seeing something similar today as university presidents and others in positions of academic authority fall all over themselves to show their support for anti-intellectual thugs on campus. Last May 2016, for example, we saw the remarkable spectacle of a university president eager to show his solidarity with the Black Lives Matter protesters who prevented libertarian pundit Milo Yiannopoulos from giving a speech at DePaul University in Chicago. Marching to the front of the room just moments after Yiannopoulos began his talk, Black Lives Matter activists commandeered the stage, and one of their number wrested the microphone from the moderator's hand, screamed obscenities at Milo, and waved her fist in his face. Yet the president of DePaul, the Reverend Dennis Holtschneider, was far more interested in distancing himself from Milo than in offering a clear condemnation of Black Lives Matter tactics. Writing a letter from Normandy, France, President Holtschneider expressed his disdain for Milo's positions and tactics at great length, not only objecting to particular arguments, but especially going out of his way to belittle and blame the journalist for his encounter with the students. And the smug snootiness of his remarks about Milo are worth emphasizing. Quote, "Generally, I do not respond to speakers of Mr. Yiannopoulos' ilk, as I believe they are more entertainers and self-serving provocateurs than the public intellectuals they purport to be," Holtschneider sniffed derisively, and went on to address Yiannopoulos as if it were he, not the Black Lives Matter folks, who made a habit of screaming obscenities, threatening, and dancing on other people's platforms. Quote, "Their shtick," he says, referring to people like Yiannopoulos, "is to shock and incite a strong emotional response they can then use to discredit the moral high ground claimed by their opponents. This is unworthy of university discourse, but not unfamiliar across American higher education. There will always be speakers who exploit the differences within our human community to their own benefit, blissfully unconcerned with the damage they leave behind." End quote. Far from expressing any anger on Yiannopoulos' behalf, Mr. Holtschneider makes it clear that he's angry at Yiannopoulos, going so far as to suggest that there is something morally despicable about Yiannopoulos' strategy to, quote, discredit the moral high ground claimed by BLM by showing that they have no moral high ground. And he explicitly lays the blame for the damage of the evening at Yiannopoulos' door as if it were he, not radical black activists who made it impossible for intellectual debate to take place, and as if it were he, not the grievance-fueled protesters who exploit differences within the community for their own benefit. When it came time to refer to the Black Lives Matter protesters, Holtschneider just couldn't seem to summon nearly the same level of outrage or even dismay. All he could manage was the statement that, quote, "those who interrupted the speech were wrong to do so." Well, even a kindergartner could have gone that far. And he had a vague assertion that he was, quote, "ashamed for DePaul University," when I saw a student rip the microphone from the hands of the conference moderator and wave it in the face of our speaker, end quote. Wait a minute, ashamed for DePaul? It's an extraordinarily broad and indeterminate reference, purposely so, I suspect. Clearly, the president has trouble naming the instigators. I suspect he doesn't want to mention that it was Black students who sat on a stage with nothing of intellectual substance to say and confident that nothing would be done to them. They were pretty certain their president was a wimp, and they were right. Holtschneider's statement that he was, quote, ashamed for DePaul University gives him plenty of wiggle room, leaving open the possibility that the real target of his shame was the racist policies of the university, or the racist inequalities of society in general, those convenient targets for liberal castigation when women or minorities behave badly. How very politically correct of President Holtschneider. So programmed is he by SJW propaganda that he must speak as if violent radicals who would terrorize the university community are the real victims of a gay writer whose Oscar Wildean provocations and witty arguments are somehow worse than their overt anti-intellectualism and threats of physical harm. So the question is, how did Mr. Holtschneider get to be president of DePaul, and why aren't his colleagues standing up in droves to demand that he take a clear stand in favor of free speech and against SJW intimidation and criminality? Why are there so many like Holtschneider on our campuses? As I've indicated already, there are a variety of reasons often acting in concert, including the following. 1, Holtschneider and his ilk may well be true believers, devotees of radical social justice ideology. There are a lot of them out there. Physics teachers, for example, who've gone rogue and decided they'd rather have their students think about why there aren't more Black women doing physics than understand the periodic table. In The Closing of the American Mind, Alan Bloom described how in the late 1960s professors lost faith in the significance of their disciplines and sought meaning for their lives as professors in contemporary social causes such as combating racism and colonialism. It was a lot sexier, a lot more emotionally stirring and heroic to say that you were attacking the power structures that kept women and people of color in servitude than to say you were advancing understanding of changing 19th century courtship patterns, or advancing understanding of the use of fugal structures in early Renaissance church music, or looking at the significance of color symbolism in Milton's Paradise Lost. In a society in which traditional religious commitment has been largely abandoned, intersectional feminism offers many of the comforts of a cherished faith, especially the purity of redemption and the zeal of true belonging, with none of the serious learning and humility demanded by a genuine theology of repentance. The second reason, in cases where Holtschneider and his ilk are not true believers, and it's impossible to know what percentage are, they are canny and cynical careerists who know that there is nothing to be lost by adhering to the dominant orthodoxy of the day, and a great deal in the way of career advancement and praise to be won. Just as in times past, people like Holtschneider would have been faithful attenders every Sunday at the Anglican Church, today they are faithful attenders at the Church of Intersectional Feminist Piety, eager to kneel at the communion rail, or even as in the case of university presidents, to be invited to administer the academic sacraments wearing a gorgeous liturgical chasuble. According to a 2012 survey published in Inside Higher Education and conducted by the UCLA Higher Education Research Institute, a full 63% of professors at institutes of higher education identify as liberal or far left, with the vast majority of the rest identifying as middle of the road, very few conservatives. Women were further to the left than their male peers, clocking in at 67.5% liberal or far left, which means, among other things, that male academic leaders wanting to appeal to their female colleagues will be especially especially inclined to support social justice positions, and it also means that as more and more women are hired into academic positions, the consolidation of support for social justice ideology will increase. One might be tempted to take heart from the fact that the percentage of liberals and far leftists in higher education isn't even higher. After all, a full 1/3 of professors do not identify as liberal or far left, but this makes no difference. The 1/3 of non-leftists tend to be far less convinced of their righteousness and far less inclined to agitate for their positions than those in the liberal and far left majority. And this last point brings me to the third reason why so very few are demanding that Holtschneider and his pals offer any resistance to the SJW bullies. The combination of fear and the natural disinclination to speak out felt by those who disagree with the SJW ideology. Conservatives and middle-of-the-roaders tend to be, conservative and middle of the road in their behavior as well as their political ideology. They distrust revolutionary fervor. They tend to be cautious by temperament, preferring civility over passionate demands. Many of them simply want to be left alone to pursue their research and teaching. And of course, they are deeply afraid, some with good reason. Many academics are untenured and/or reliant on the goodwill of their colleagues and administrators in order to be given classes to teach or to be approved for tenure and promotion. More generally, they depend on their colleagues' goodwill to advance in their careers and to flourish, to be invited to conferences, to get their research funded and published by the major granting agencies and academic journals, or simply to be in the know and in the swing of things in their departments. They feel their vulnerability, and they know that their politically committed friends will be ruthless in preventing their advancement if they step out of line. Those who are secure in their positions, tenured and looking comfortably toward retirement, like me, they'll still hesitate at the thought of the social discomfort, the cooling of friendships, the potential ostracization that will almost certainly follow a confession of ideological treason. Fear of being shut out of what C.S. Lewis called the inner ring keep many towing the ideological line. Adding to this fear is the fact that many academics were social losers in their youth, shy, socially challenged nerds who spent a lot of time sitting alone in their rooms, reading books, or doing math problems, dreaming of one day, maybe, being a little bit popular, having some cool friends. Therefore, the last thing these people want now is to find themselves on the outside again, subject to the ridicule and disappointment of their cool SJW colleagues. This is not a very respectable reason to stay silent, but it is a strongly felt one. Thus, for a variety of reasons, both serious and trivial, the great ideal of the university as a place for the pursuit of truth and the free exchange of ideas, that ideal is being lost, replaced by deadening intellectual conformity, fearful obedience, and mob rule by which those who shout the loudest and burnish their victim credentials most assiduously will get their way. And the few who break ranks, whether consciously or even by accident, will be sacrificed to their fury. To borrow a phrase, this is the way the university ends, not with a bang, but a whimper.